Elara and Finn had never believed in old town legends, but the moment they stepped onto the riverbank, something in the black water seemed to watch them. Shadows twisted beneath the surface, and faint whispers slithered through the air, calling names no one else knew. By nightfall, the river wasn't just a river anymore, it was alive, patient, and it wanted them. I had always thought of the river as a sanctuary. Its calm, glassy surface had drawn me since childhood, a place where I could wander for hours without seeing another soul. That summer I returned, hoping the familiar waters would offer comfort. But from the moment I stepped onto the riverbank, something felt off. The air was heavier than usual, carrying a damp metallic smell that clung to my clothes and filled my lungs. The wind was still almost oppressive, and the usual chorus of birds and insects was silent, as if the world itself had been muted. The path along the bank was slippery with mud and fallen leaves. I tried to ignore the growing sense of unease as I walked, but every step seemed to echo in the stillness, louder than it should have been. The trees leaned closer than I remembered, their gnarled branches twisting toward me like skeletal hands. Shadows pooled in the corners of my vision, shifting whenever I tried to focus. I felt the faintest brush of movement at the edge of my sight, but when I turned, there was nothing. The river itself was darker than I remembered, almost unnaturally so. The surface rippled gently in the breeze, but the deeper water looked like ink, hiding what could be beneath. I knelt near the edge, peering into the murky depths, and for a moment, I thought I saw something in indistinct shape gliding just beneath the surface. It moved with an unnatural grace, silent and deliberate, and I recoiled, stepping back onto the bank. My heart thumped painfully, and my palms grew slick with sweat. As I continued along the path, I noticed a narrow cove, a hidden bend in the river I hadn't paid attention to as a child. Something about it called to me, though I couldn't say why. I approached cautiously, the mud sucking at my boots with every step. The water here was darker still, and a thick layer of algae covered patches of the surface. I crouched closer, peering in, and that's when I saw Ita's face reflected in the water. Pale and twisted eyes, hollow and black, mouth frozen in a silent scream. I jerked back, nearly losing my balance, but the face vanished, leaving only the ripples I had disturbed. Shivering, I tried to convince myself it was my reflection distorted by the murky water, but a deep, instinctual fear had taken root. I turned to leave, yet the path behind me seemed wrong. Trees blocked my way where there had been a clear path, and the cove twisted unnaturally, as if the river itself had shifted overnight. Panic rose in my chest. I could feel the river watching, waiting. A faint sound reached me then, soft and wet, like dragging something through the water. I froze, straining to hear, but the sound stopped abruptly, leaving only the unsettling quiet. My pulse raced as I stumbled forward, the river close enough that the air smelled of decay and damp earth. Something about the water's surface made my skin crawl. The ripples seemed deliberate, forming shapes too large to be fish, patterns too coordinated to be the wind. I walked faster, my boots sinking into the mud, and then I felt it tug at my ankle. My heart skipped. I stumbled, nearly falling face first into the water. It was cold, unnaturally so, and the touch sent a shock through my body. I scrambled backward, my eyes wide, searching the surface. Nothing was visible, yet I knew it had been there. I could feel the water's pull, gentle at first, then insistent, as if it wanted me to step closer. My mind screamed at me to run, but something compelled me to stay, to look. That's when I noticed the movement beneath the water. Long dark shapes twisted just under the surface, moving against the current, toward me. I wanted to turn and flee, but my feet felt rooted in the mud, and then I saw them, dozens of pale, glistening faces, eyes wide and black, mouths open in silent screams. They pressed against the water as if trying to escape, yet they didn't move when I recoiled. The water rippled around them unnaturally, forming shapes and angles that shouldn't exist. I stumbled backward, breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The cove seemed to stretch and bend, the trees leaning closer, the river widening, pulling me toward it, and then I heard it, the wet, gurgling whisper, soft but unmistakable, calling my name. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was patient, cruel, as if the river itself had been waiting for me all along. I turned to run, mud and water splashing around my boots, but the path behind me was gone. In its place, the river stretched endlessly, dark and alive. I could feel its pull, dragging at my mind, whispering promises I didn't want to hear. And when I looked down, the water shimmered with a reflection that wasn't mine, a face pale and hollow, grinning as if it knew something I didn't. I fled, stumbling through the mud, the whisper following me, soft and wet. And when I finally reached the edge of the familiar forest, the sound of the river faded, but the image of that face, black eyes and twisted grin, stayed burned into my mind. I didn't know it then, but the river had already claimed me, and the cove had secrets it would not let go of. I couldn't stop thinking about the river. Even days after that first visit, the memory of the pale, hollow face haunted me, and every quiet moment was invaded by the wet, patient whisper that seemed to echo in my mind. I told myself it had been a trick of the light, my imagination running wild in the oppressive heat, but deep down I knew that was a lie. Something had followed me that day, and it was waiting, just beneath the surface. Against my better judgment, I returned. The path felt different this time, though I couldn't pinpoint why. The familiar landmarks were twisted. Trees that I remembered standing far apart now leaned too close, their roots crawling like veins into the mud. The air was still, thick with the scent of wet earth and something fouler, almost like rotting meat. I tried to shake off the feeling of being watched, but it clung to me, tightening around my chest like a rope. As I approached the narrow cove, my boots sinking into the slick mud, I noticed something I had missed before: footprints. Small, numerous, circling the riverbank in strange, looping patterns. They weren't human, not entirely. The toes were too narrow, the spacing irregular, and they seemed to appear and disappear in ways that made no sense. I stared at them, a creeping dread spreading through me. I was not alone, and whatever had left these prints had been watching me for longer than I dared imagine. I followed the river downstream, moving slowly, every instinct screaming at me to leave. Shadows flitted across the water, long and thin, disappearing the moment I tried to focus on them. I kept seeing glimpses of figures beneath the surface, pale and elongated, their movements smooth and deliberate, like smoke curling through water. The deeper I walked, the darker the river became. Sunlight struggled to pierce the surface, and the black water seemed to absorb the world around it, reflecting nothing, revealing nothing. The whisper returned, soft and wet, threading through the air like a song I could almost understand. My skin prickled as the sound wrapped around me, calling me by name, tugging at something deep inside my chest. The sensation was both terrifying and magnetic. I wanted to resist, but I couldn't tear my gaze from the river. Every ripple seemed alive, shaping itself into faces that disappeared when I blinked. Faces with hollow eyes, twisted mouths, and long spindly fingers reaching out of the water, beckoning me closer. By evening, the sky had turned a strange, bruised green. Clouds hung heavy and low, casting the river in a sickly, unnatural light. The water's surface bubbled in odd, rhythmic patterns, like it was breathing. My heart pounded in my ears as I noticed movement beneath the waves. Something large shifted, sliding along the riverbed with impossible speed. I could feel it watching me, waiting for the right moment. Then, without warning, a hand broke the surface. Pale, slick, and glistening, it rose slowly, testing the air, curling fingers toward me. I froze, unable to move as a sense of ancient hunger radiated from it. I wanted to turn and run, but my feet felt rooted in the mud. When I finally blinked, the hand had vanished, but the water rippled unnaturally, forming concentric circles that seemed to pulse with life. I stumbled back, my mind screaming at me to leave, yet I couldn't tear my eyes from the river. Something beneath it was moving toward me, pulling at the edges of reality, bending the world around it. And then I saw the faces, dozens of them, pale and wet, pressing against the surface, mouths open in silent screams. Their eyes were black voids that stared straight into me, and though they didn't move, I could feel their awareness, their hunger, their intent. The worst part wasn't their gaze, it was the whispering. It had grown louder, more insistent, threading words through my mind. I couldn't understand them, not entirely, but the meaning was clear. They wanted me. They were patient, eternal, and they had been waiting. Every instinct screamed to flee, but every step backward was mirrored by a pull from the water. As if the river itself was alive and aware of my fear, I fell to my knees, mud and water soaking my clothes, and I finally dared to glance at the reflection in the river. My face stared back at me, but it wasn't my own. My eyes were hollow and dull, my mouth twisted into a grin I didn't recognize, and my skin was paler than it had ever been. I stumbled away, terrified, but the pull of the river persisted, tugging at my legs, my chest, my mind. And then, just as I reached what I thought was safety, I saw it, a figure in the water, taller and darker than anything I had imagined, moving toward me with impossible speed. Its face was featureless, smooth and pale, but I could feel its gaze, heavy and hungry, drilling into my soul. I turned and ran, screaming silently into the oppressive night, the river behind me churning and whispering promises I could not escape. Even now I can't forget it. The river is never still in my memory, always moving, always watching, always waiting. And I know, somewhere beneath that dark water, something waits for me to return. I couldn't sleep. Every night the river haunted my dreams, its black waters stretching farther than they should, endless and alive. Even when my eyes were closed, I could hear its soft, wet, gurgling whispers threading through my mind, calling me back. Faces emerged in the shadows, pale and hollow-eyed, mouths frozen in silent screams. Each time I blinked they vanished, but their presence lingered, pressing on my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. I told myself it was just fear, my imagination, yet a part of me knew better. Something had followed me from the river, and it was patient. I returned again, despite the terror gnawing at me. This time I brought a camera, hoping to capture proof, some evidence to convince myself I wasn't losing my mind. The path to the river was distorted, familiar yet alien. Trees leaned closer than I remembered, shadows pooling in unnatural shapes, and the mud beneath my boots seemed to cling tighter with every step. The wind was still, but I could feel it pressing against my skin, carrying a damp, rotten scent that made my stomach turn. The cove appeared first, deceptively serene. The water was blacker than ever, reflecting nothing of the sky above. I trained my camera on the surface, but nothing seemed unusual at first. Then I reviewed the shots later, and froze. In every photo a figure lingered just at the edge of the frame, pale and distorted, always behind me. And in each image, my reflection was wrong. My eyes were hollow, my expressions stretched in ways I didn't recognize, and sometimes, just sometimes, my mouth appeared to be smiling, though I hadn't moved it. I wandered downstream, heart hammering, boots sinking into thick mud. Shadows moved beneath the surface, long and thin, curling through the black water. I couldn't tell what they were, only that they were deliberate, intelligent, and aware of my presence. The whispering returned, soft and wet, threading words I couldn't fully understand through my mind. I wanted to run, yet I couldn't look away. Every ripple seemed purposeful, every flicker of movement a warning or a lure. Evening came, and the sky turned a bruised, greenish gray. The water shimmered with an oily reflection, and a chill crawled up my spine. I had the distinct impression that the river itself was aware of me, watching, waiting. And then I saw movement in the water, a long, thin shape gliding against the current, almost invisible in the darkness. My stomach tightened. Whatever it wasn't human. Its motion was fluid, silent, predatory. I stumbled as something brushed against my leg. Cold, slick, and strong, it tugged at me, pulling me toward the river. I fought to free myself, fear driving adrenaline through my veins. But the pull persisted. I glanced down. The water bubbled unnaturally, forming grotesque shapes. Faces pressed against the surface, pale and wet, mouths open in silent screams. Eyes black as voids stared directly at me, unblinking and aware. They weren't just faces, they were countless, infinite, pressing against me, watching my every move. I tried to step back, but the mud beneath my boots seemed to shift, making each movement heavier, slower, as though the river was rooting me in place. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. I couldn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. It wanted me. It had been patient, waiting all this time, and now it was ready. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet I couldn't tear my eyes from the water. Then I saw a hand break the surface. Pale, elongated, slick with water, and tipped with jagged broken nails. It reached slowly toward me, curling fingers as though testing my resolve. My breath caught, and I staggered backward, mud spraying around my boots. I blinked, and the hand vanished. But the ripple it left spread across the water like a pulse, a heartbeat of the river itself. The black faces beneath the surface shifted, moving closer, pushing against the invisible boundary between them and me. I turned to run, slipping and falling in the mud, my chest heaving. Behind me, the river churned, black waves slapping at the bank, whispering promises I could not resist. And then I saw it, a figure, tall and pale, moving beneath the surface faster than anything natural. Its face was featureless, smooth and pale. Yet I felt its awareness, its hunger. I scrambled to my feet, desperate to escape, but the path I thought I knew had vanished. The cove twisted, the trees leaned inward, and the river seemed to stretch endlessly, alive and patient. By the time I reached the edge of the forest, I was trembling, soaked, mud streaked across my clothes. The river's whispers faded into the distance, but the image of those pale, hollow faces stayed burned into my mind. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat. Every shadow seemed to carry a ripple of black water, every reflection a hollow-eyed grin. I knew, even then, that the river had marked me. It was only a matter of time before it came for me again, and when it did, there would be no escape. I tried to avoid the river for weeks. I told myself I needed distance, that it had been nothing more than fear and imagination. Yet every night, the whispers returned. Soft, wet, insistent, threading through my mind like cold fingers. I could feel the water crawling beneath my skin, black and patient, pulling at my thoughts. I avoided looking at mirrors. I avoided anything that reflected me. Yet the images haunted me, the pale, hollow faces, the twisted reflections, the impossible grins. And then, one evening, curiosity or perhaps foolishness drove me back. I didn't bring a camera this time, just a flashlight and a sense of dread that made every step toward the river heavy. The path was wrong from the start. The familiar landmarks were distorted, trees leaned closer, shadows pooled unnaturally, and the mud beneath my boots sucked at my feet with a persistence that made each movement a struggle. The river called to me, low and patient, and though I tried to resist, I couldn't tear my eyes away. The cove was there, yet unrecognizable. The water shimmered blackly, reflecting nothing of the sky. Its surface pulsed slightly, like the slow, deliberate breathing of some enormous creature beneath. I walked along the bank, each step making the mud squelch unpleasantly underfoot. Faces pressed just beneath the surface, pale and wet, eyes black voids staring directly at me. Their mouths opened in silent screams, yet I could feel the sound of their voices in my mind, whispering promises and threats I didn't want to understand. The deeper I went, the more the river seemed to change. Trees bent over unnaturally, their roots curling into the water. Shadows moved where they shouldn't, twisting, crawling, always just at the edge of my vision. I could feel a presence, patient and deliberate, stalking me from beneath the surface. Something large shifted just under the water, too fast to be natural. It didn't make a splash. It didn't make a sound. It was there, waiting, watching, counting my steps. I noticed movement closer to the bank. A hand emerged, pale and slick, the fingers long and jagged, tipped with broken nails. It tested the air, curling slowly toward me. I froze, heart hammering, mud sucking at my boots. The water rippled unnaturally around it, forming patterns that shouldn't exist, angles that were impossible. As if the river itself were bending the world. My stomach churned, but I couldn't look away. The hand lingered, patient, waiting for me to respond. I stumbled backward, slipping, the mud coating my hands and knees. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, threading words I couldn't understand through my mind. I didn't want to understand, yet I did. It promised release, immortality, and escape from everything I feared, but the price was something I couldn't imagine. I could feel it tugging at my chest, my arms, my legs, pulling me toward the river. Panic surged through me, yet the pull persisted. Then I saw them, faces beneath the water, countless faces, pale and slick, mouths open in endless screams. Their black eyes stared directly into mine, aware, hungry, patient. I fell to my knees, chest heaving, mud covering me, water lapping at my boots. The whispers became coherent, but I couldn't understand them as words, only as meaning. They wanted me. They had been waiting for me all along. The river had been alive, patient, and aware of my fear. And then I saw it rising beneath the surface. A figure taller than anything natural, moving with impossible speed. Its face was featureless, smooth, pale, yet its presence pressed on me, heavy and deliberate. My mind screamed to run, but the mud and roots held me fast. The water churned around it, black waves forming unnatural shapes, pulsing with a life of their own. I felt my strength drain, as if the river itself was feeding off my terror. I finally managed to scramble to my feet, heart hammering, mud streaking my clothes. I turned to flee, but the path behind me had vanished, replaced by an endless stretch of black water and twisted trees. The river pulsed like a living thing, whispering my name, calling me back. I could feel its grip on my mind, tugging me toward the cove, toward the pale faces, toward something eternal and hungry. I ran blindly, slipping again, until I reached the edge of the forest. The whispers faded, but the memory of their gaze lingered, black eyes staring from the water, patient and waiting. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can see them, pressing beneath the surface. The river's voice is never silent, never far. It waits, it has been waiting, and I know, no matter how far I run, one day I will return, because the river never forgets and it never forgives. I thought I had escaped. I had left town, moved hundreds of miles away, convinced that distance would sever the river's grasp on me. But the whispers never left. Every night, even in my new apartment, I could hear the wet, patient voice threading through my thoughts, calling my name. Mirrors became unbearable. Reflections of my own face seemed wrong, warped, hollow-eyed, and occasionally, that twisted, impossible grin would linger long enough to make my chest tighten. I avoided water entirely, refusing to go near lakes, streams, or even sinks. Yet I could feel it's the river, alive and patient, reaching for me no matter where I went. Months later, curiosity or perhaps a foolish compulsion drove me back. I returned to the town I had abandoned, to the river I had feared for so long. When I arrived, everything was gone. The familiar cove had vanished, replaced by a flat, lifeless bank. Trees I remembered leaning and twisting into the water were gone, as if the world had conspired to erase the landscape I had known. The river itself was a strange, oily shimmer, wider than I remembered, its black surface reflecting nothing of the sky above. My chest tightened. Something about the stillness was worse than the chaos I had fled. I walked along the bank, heart hammering, and noticed footprints in the mud. My own footprints, or what appeared to be mine but smaller ones, circled them, looping endlessly in unnatural patterns. My stomach turned. The river hadn't forgotten me. It had been patient, watching, waiting, and now it was ready. I stepped closer, cautiously, and the mud beneath my boots squelched as if testing my weight, my resolve. I shone my flashlight on the water, and for a moment, it was calm, glassy, yet I could feel movement just beneath the surface. Something was shifting, patient, deliberate, hiding, waiting for me to notice. I raised my phone and snapped a picture of the river. My reflection appeared first, pale and hollow-eyed, twisted in ways I didn't recognize. But then, behind me in the photo, countless faces pressed just beneath the surface of the water, pale and wet, mouths open in silent screams. My breath caught. They were endless, black eyes, staring directly at me. And then, in the corner of the image, a message formed in the mud and glistening under the flashlight's beam. Next time. You won't run. I staggered back, heart pounding, mud sucking at my boots. I wanted to leave, but the air grew heavy, thick with the smell of decay. Shadows twisted along the bank, moving unnaturally, bending around me as if the river itself were breathing. I could feel it pulling at me, not just my legs but my chest, my mind, my soul. I stumbled and fell, hands sinking into the mud, and the whispers filled my head, louder than ever, promising eternity if I stepped closer. I scrambled backward, trying to flee, but something beneath the surface surged. The water erupted, black waves slamming against the bank, and pale elongated hands reached out. Fingers curled, slick with water, tipped with jagged, broken nails, grabbing at the edges of the world I thought was safe. Faces pressed closer, mouths opening wider, eyes hollow, gaping, endless. The whispers became a roar in my head. Come, belong. My chest tightened, my vision blurred, and I could feel my mind bending under the pressure. I scrambled to my feet, fleeing blindly, yet the river's reach followed me, tugging, pulling, patient and eternal. I reached the edge of the town, beyond where the river should have ended, and finally stumbled into the street. Breathing hard, mud streaked across my face. I thought I had escaped. The whispers faded, leaving only silence. For a moment I felt relief, but then I looked down. My phone buzzed with a new photo notification, hands trembling. I unlocked it. The image wasn't of the river. It was of me, standing in my apartment months ago, sleeping, or so it appeared, and standing behind me in the reflection, pale and grinning, were the countless faces I had seen in the river. Their black eyes stared into mine, unblinking, patient and eternal. I hadn't taken this photo. I hadn't even been awake. And then, in the reflection, I saw it, my own face, pale and hollow-eyed, smiling with that impossible grin. I froze, staring at myself, paralyzed, and the whisper returned, soft and wet. We've always been here. I dropped the phone. The room grew colder, the shadows stretching longer, and I realized, with a sick certainty, that the river had never been confined to water. It had followed me, patient, endless, and no matter how far I ran, it would wait, always. The river wasn't behind me, it was inside me.